an epic dialogue, theology, science, and philosophy. In conclusion, Part 5. I have so far put forth the idea that in order to form a coherent worldview, one must ultimately take the steps to form a unified theory wherein theology, science, and philosophy have a productive relationship in their conversations about reality without negation of one or the other or a sense of overly competitive dominance, if you will, a philosophy of true equality between the academics of theology, science, and philosophy. That said, I'd like to continue, and I have a few articles to read as well as a couple articles rather, and a paragraph from a book that I am currently reading, and I saw this section on science, so I thought I would include it in the conversation as well. And I'll do a quote from that section of this particular book I'm reading. It has to do with the intersection between science, theology, and philosophy as well. And it fits neatly rather into this conversation. So, an epic dialogue in conclusion. So, one theory I have not mentioned within, and this could be considered perhaps a interdisciplinary field where the discussion between creation science, or what some scientists would call pseudoscience, philosophy, theories, plural, of evolution. I believe I mentioned a few. I haven't exhaustively gone into the subject of differing theories of evolution, but evolutionary theory and its relationship to theology as well, I've discussed in the overall epic dialogue here. So intelligent design, I haven't mentioned, and I'm going to read an article from Discovery Institute, and it's called Intelligent Design, and Creationism, and it makes the distinction by saying they just are not the same. Many people make the mistake and think that intelligent design theory and creationism are the same, and they are not, apparently, according to this article, which I'm about to read. Intelligent design and creationism just aren't the same. By John G. West, post in December 1st, 2002. Research, News, and Opportunities in Science and Theology, December 1st, 2002. Quote, recent news accounts about the controversies over evolution in Ohio and Georgia have contained references to the scientific theory of intelligent design. Some advocates of Darwinian evolution try to conflate intelligent design, or ID, with creationism, sometimes using the term intelligent design creationism. In fact, intelligent design is quite different from creationism. And I would say they're different in the way that they communicate with known scientific theories. as even some of its critics have acknowledged. University of Wisconsin historian of science Ronald Numbers is critical of intelligent design, yet, according to the Associated Press, he agrees the creationist label is inaccurate when it comes to the ID movement. So it's a movement. Why then do some Darwinians keep trying to identify ID with creationism? According to Numbers, it is because they think such claims are the easiest way to discredit intelligent design, by perhaps making it sound silly to some ears, I would say. In other words, the charge that intelligent design is creationism is a rhetorical strategy on the part of those who wish to delegitimize design theory without actually addressing the merits of its case. So, I would say overall, the intelligent design theory postulates a God because of the apparent design within what they call creation. So there is design. And design, I would say, implies a mind of some sort, a designer, if you will. In reality, there are a variety of reasons why intelligent design should not be confused with creationism. One, intelligent design creationism, so-called, is a prerogative term coined by some Darwinists to attack intelligent design. It is not a neutral label of the intelligent design movement. And so why would they attack the intelligent design theory is my question. Because they don't want to imply a creator within their worldview. They want to leave that idea out. But not all scientists have this attitude. Scientists and scholars supportive of intelligent design do not describe themselves as intelligent design, quote-unquote, creationists. Indeed, intelligent design scholars do not regard intelligent design theory as a form of creationism. Therefore, to employ the term intelligent design creationism is inaccurate, inappropriate, and tendentious, especially on the part of scholars and journalists who are striving to be fair. Intelligent design creationism, so-called, is not a neutral description of intelligent design theory. It is a polemical label created for rhetorical purposes to downplay design and the implication of a creator. Intelligent design is the proper neutral description of the theory. Two, unlike creationism, intelligent design is based on science, not sacred texts. Although I would say in a unified view, if you were to embrace intelligent design and or creationism of some sort, you would not neglect the sacred texts that tell us about how to have a relationship with this so-called designer. Okay. Intelligent design is based on science, not solely sacred texts. Creationism is focused on defending a literal reading of the Genesis account, usually including the creation of the earth by the biblical God a few thousand years ago, as opposed to billions of years between ancient Earth creationism, young Earth creationism. Unlike creationism, the scientific theory of intelligent design is agnostic or neutral regarding the source of design. It has no commitment to defending Genesis, the Bible, or any other sacred text. Spoken like a true scientist, I would say. Instead, intelligent design theory is an effort to empirically detect whether the apparent design in nature observed by biologists is genuine design, the product of an organizing intelligence. And of course, well, what could this organizing intelligence possibly be? I don't think they go so far as to ask that question. Theology asks that question and answers it, I would say, quite adequately. Or is simply the product of chance and mechanical natural laws. The effort to detect design in nature is being adopted by a growing number of biologists, biochemists, physicists, mathematicians, and philosophers of science at American colleges and universities. Scholars who adopt a design approach include biochemist Michael Behe of Lehigh University, microbiologist Scott Minich at the University of Idaho, and mathematician William Dembski at Baylor University. 3. Creationists know that intelligent design theory is not creationism. The two most prominent creationist groups, Answers in Genesis Ministries and Institute of Creation Research, have criticized the intelligent design movement because design theory, unlike creationism, does not seek to defend the biblical account of creation. I would add here that I'm not saying that there isn't, but just to be fair, if there is a God, I believe there is. Otherwise, I wouldn't be wasting time doing this. God doesn't need to be defended, especially if it's God. And that reasoning makes sense. Man does not need to defend God, whether or not God exists. You may feel the sense to defend the position, a theological position, in the face of faithlessness. But other than that, God needs no help in defense. I think God has done a wonderful job at defending himself, itself, thus far. So, Answers in Genesis Ministry specifically complained about intelligent design movement's refusal to identify the designer with the biblical God. And noted that philosophically and theologically, the leading lights of the ID movement form an eclectic group indeed, according to AIG, Answers in Genesis, who I believe adhere to a young earth creationism. According to AIG, many prominent figures in the IDM movement reject or are hostile to biblical creation, especially the notion of recent creation. But there are creationists as well that do not conform to the idea of a young earth and universe. as well, which I have discussed in the preceding posts in this epic dialogue. Indeed, according to AIG, many prominent figures reject biblical creation. I think it's just because it's an incomplete model. And it's reductionist. Ignores metaphysics. Many other evidences of an older earth. So old earth creationists, which are not a part of the IDM movement, or intelligent design, rather. M means movement. Disagree with their model of creation as well. Likewise, ICR, Creation Research, or Institute for Creation Research, has criticized intelligent design for not employing, quote unquote, the biblical method, as if there were only one, concluding that design is not enough. I would agree with that. It's not. Design is part of the conclusion. Design leads to a designer. I mean, you can't have a design without some type of a designer of some sort. I would say mind before matter. Creationist groups like AIG and ICR clearly understand the intelligent design is not the same thing as creationism. So let's not get those confused. Like Darwinism, design theory may have implications for religion, but these implications are distinct from its scientific program. And this is where perhaps there would be a productive conversation between religion and science. Intelligent design theory, being as neutral as it is, perhaps could be a bridge of some productive conversation rather than a battle of wits, talking past one another and accusations and such. Design theory may have implications for religion. I would agree, it definitely does. Intelligent design theory may hold implications for fields outside of science, such as theology, and indeed it does, ethics and philosophy. But such implications are distinct from intelligent design as a scientific research program, which sticks to the science, so to speak. And I see nothing wrong with that. I believe that the implications that intelligent design holds for theology and philosophy are important. But such implications are distinct from intelligent design as a scientific research program. In this matter, intelligent design theory is no different than the theory of evolution. Leading Darwinists routinely try to draw out theological and cultural implications from the theory of evolution. Oxford's Richard Dawkins, for example, claims that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. What was his quote? Harvard's E.O. Wilson employs Darwinian biology to deconstruct religion and the arts. Other Darwinists try to elicit positive implications for religion from Darwin's theory. However, partial it is. The Pro-Evolution National Center for Science Education, or NCSE, has organized a faith network to promote the study of evolution in churches. Interesting. Eugene Scott, executive director of the NCSE acknowledges that the purpose of the group's clergy outreach program is to try to encourage members of the practicing clergy to address the issue of evolution in Sunday schools and adult Bible classes. And of course, I would imagine that the anti-evolutionist creationists perhaps would not altogether acknowledge or appreciate that very much, as it goes against their absolutized worldview. They may have to modify their theological view. I imagine they would resist that change. And to get the church members to talk about the theological implications of evolution. So that's good. The NCSE's Faith Network director even claims that Darwin's theory of evolution has, for those open to the possibilities, expanded our notions of God. If Darwinists have the right to explore the cultural and theological implications of Darwin's theory without disqualifying Darwinism as science, then intelligent design-inspired discussions in social sciences and the humanities clearly do not disqualify design as a scientific theory. 5. Fair-minded critics recognize the difference between intelligent design, which is largely science, and creationism. Scholars and science writers who are willing to explore the evidence for themselves are coming to the conclusion that intelligent design is different from creationism. As mentioned earlier, historian of science Ronald Numbers has acknowledged the distinction between intelligent design and creationism. So has science writer Robert Wright, writing in Time magazine. Critics of ID, which has been billed in the press as new and sophisticated, say it's just creationism in disguise. If so, it's a good disguise. Creationists believe that God made current life forms from scratch. No evolutionary process whatsoever. The ID movement takes no position on how life got here, and many adherents believe in evolution. Some even grant a role to the evolutionary engine posited by Darwin's natural selection. They just deny that natural selection alone could have driven life all the way from pond scum to us. Whatever problems the theory of intelligent design may have, it should be allowed to rise or fall on its own merits, not on the merits of some other theory. End quote. And now 2 paragraphs, separate paragraphs from a process perspective. So this is one that focuses specifically on a particular doctrine. It's called creation ex nihilo, or the idea that everything that we see came from nothing. So philosophically, there are or have been throughout history some problems with this theory. It does indeed line up with the Big Bang theory, that creation came out of pretty much nothing. So that's the term creation ex nihilo, meaning nothing. But there are also problems with this idea. A process philosopher / theologian Thomas J. Oord writes this article, Creation ex nihilo, the Problem, published January 19th, 2010. Let's see what this says. So did everything come from absolutely nothing? So the problem is a logical problem. And this is what he says. I believe God created the heavens, the earth, and every living thing. But I think Christians should reject the idea that God created the universe from absolutely nothing. Theologically, creation ex nihilo is the doctrine that most Christians subscribe to or have believed. Process philosophy has another view. Most process theologians reject, or I would say 50-50, reject the idea of creation ex nihilo. For what I believe Charles Hartshorne said creation out of chaos or some primordial matter of some sort that has always existed. Something has always existed, in other words, according to this view. Continuing, theologians typically use the Latin word or label creation ex nihilo to identify the idea that God created the universe from absolutely nothing, while a few have said that nothing of nihilo refers to chaos. The vast majority of theologians have insisted on the literal meaning of nothing. God began with absolutely nothing when creating our universe. I find a few Christians who seriously consider the assets and liabilities of creation ex nihilo. Few study the biblical, historical, theological, and scientific dimensions of the doctrine. This is in many ways understandable until we have some reason to question traditional assumptions. We tend to accept what we're told. And I would say that that's what the majority do. I first became suspicious of creation ex nihilo in the mid-90s. At first, my worry was what the doctrine implied about God's power and the problem of evil. If God had the power to create something from absolutely nothing, God would have the power to prevent genuine evil unilaterally. Genuine evil exists that a loving God would want to prevent. So I began to entertain the idea that creation ex nihilo may not be worth affirming. Over the years, I've realized that the doctrine has many other significant problems. I list 9 below. For most of the 9, I add a brief sentence giving support or justification. The Bible plays a central role in my theology, but I list the biblical problem with creation ex nihilo last, so I can supplement it with a few quotes from biblical scholars. Problems with creation ex nihilo. One theoretical problem. Absolute nothingness cannot be conceived. It's impossible. 2. Historical problem. Creation ex nihilo was first proposed by Gnostics, Valentinus, Basilides, who assumed that creation was inherently evil. Interestingly, mainstream Christendom have also, in their doctrine of original sin, adopted this idea from the Gnostics, but I would say reshaped it into a workable doctrine. So they assumed that creation was inherently evil and that God does not act in history. It was adopted by early Christian theologians to affirm the kind of absolute divine power that many Christians, especially Wesleyans now reject the empirical problem. 3. We have no evidence that our universe originally came into being from absolutely nothing. No evidence whatsoever. It's an assumption. 4. Creation at an instant problem. We have no evidence in history of the universe after the Big Bang that entities can emerge instantaneously from absolute nothingness. Out of nothing comes nothing. Ex nihilo nihilo fit. Out of nothing comes nothing. 5. Solitary power problem. Creation ex nihilo assumes that an all-powerful God once acted alone. But power is a social concept, only meaningful in relation to others. Hence the adaptation of relational power in process theology. 6. Errant revelation problem. The God with the capacity to create something from absolutely nothing would apparently have the power to guarantee an unambiguous and inerrant message of salvation. That is, an inerrant Bible, an unambiguously clear and inerrant divine revelation does not exist. Otherwise, there would be evidence of non-contradiction in the Bible with no unambiguous concepts whatsoever. But this is not the case. If you take 5 theologians and have them read, from different schools of thought, of course, the same passages in the Bible, you would get 5 different answers as to what the divine revelation actually says. So, an unambiguously clear and inerrant divine revelation does not exist. It's not a case closed. In open relational theologies, divine revelation is never final. It's always open. There's always more. Number 7, evil problem. If God once had the power to create from absolutely nothing, God essentially retains that power. But a God of love with his capacity is culpable for failing to use it periodically to prevent genuine evil. 8. Empire evil, or the empire problem, rather. The kind of divine power implied in creation ex nihilo supports a theology of empire, which is based upon unilateral force and control of others. And here I would once again recommend Charles Hartshorne's small gem of a book entitled Omnipotence and Other Theological Mistakes. So, 9, biblical problem. Scripture in Genesis, 2 Peter, and elsewhere suggests creation from something. The waters, deep, chaos, void, invisible things, etc. Not creation from absolutely nothing, which is completely illogical and makes no sense. Incoherent. Genesis 1 and other biblical passages do not claim that God created the world from absolutely nothing. Here it was, biblical scholars say, John Levinson, properly understood. Genesis 1:1 through 2:3 cannot be invoked in support of the developed Jewish, Christian, and Muslim doctrine of creation ex nihilo. So it's a largely monotheistic concept. I'd say maybe the Eastern equivalence of that would be emptiness, perhaps, or philosophically the void. But it's not absolutely nothing, which this implies. Klaus Westermann, creation ex nihilo, is foreign to both the language and thought. Of the unknown author of Genesis, some attribute it to Moses. It is clear that there can be here no question of a creation ex nihilo or query about the origin of matter is not answered. The idea of an initial chaos goes back to mythical and pre-mythical thinking. So it seems that the further we go back in time, and therefore closer to the moment of the Big Bang, this idea of a chaos goes back, way back. Chaotic matter of some sort. Terence Fretheim, God's creating in Genesis 1 includes ordering that which already exists. God works creatively with already existing reality to bring about newness. Hence the word, he makes all things new. Rolf P. Knierim, it can be said that Yahweh is the creator of the world because he is its liberator from chaos, just as he is the creator of Israel because he is its liberator from oppression. Catherine Keller summarizes recent biblical scholarship, quote, among biblical scholars there has existed on this matter a near, if nervous, consensus for decades. The Bible knows only of the divine formation of the world out of a chaotic something. The only significant thing creation ex nihilo has going for it is that so many Christians through the ages have supported it. The earliest Christians, however, embraced the idea that God created the world out of something. And I would definitely say out of himself. Whatever that something would be. For instance, Philo postulated a pre-existent matter alongside God. Justin Pythagoras, Hermogenes, and Clement of Alexandria spoke about the creation of the world. Origen of Alexandria, and later John Scotus Erigena argued that God is essentially creative. Creativity itself, perhaps, in the process view, rather than a focus on substance and being. Creativity is the essence of God, and that flows through everything, not some separate substance, often an ethereal heaven, so to speak, that separates itself from world, but is a part of the world in process. Historian Gerhard May, when noting the early Christian theologian who did not affirm creation ex nihilo, or something from nothing, says they could hold that acceptance of an unformed matter was entirely reconcilable with biblical monotheism and the omnipotence of God. But but the majority of later Christian theologians affirmed creation ex nihilo. That's a mystery to me. There's no getting around this, and because Christian tradition is important, I do not take lightly the idea that I oppose the majority. In my mind, however, the 9 problems I have listed, I would add, and I'm sure there are more, that are philosophical in nature, I've listed above are so strong that opposing the majority of the Christian tradition seems the sensible thing to do so when it comes to this specific area of thinking. Philosophically and scientifically, creation ex nihilo is not a logical concept. Besides, the tradition does not jibe with the biblical witness on this issue. I typically opt for the Bible over tradition. I happen to think that pointing out problems in the existing theory is not enough. A constructive Christian theologian like me should suggest a replacement. I will propose an alternative theory of creation in a subsequent essay. I call it creation ex career and amore, God creating out of creation in love. And that is the end of that article by Thomas J. Oord, process theologian. And now, to finalize a summary on this epic dialogue between theology, science, and philosophy, I'd like to quote from a book that was published in around the millennium, around the year 2000. So it's rather fresh, and its insights are quite profound, I would say. Before narrating the selected paragraph from the book entitled World in Process, Creativity and Interconnection in the New Physics. So this is a hard conversation going on between philosophy, science, and theology. That said, I'd like to start with a quote from a verse about the nature of light for those who think that science doesn't offer the concept of an absolute, or there are no absolutes in science. But philosophy as well as theology defines absolute, perhaps in their own way, but the scientific fact is that absolutes do exist. One, as is mentioned in the contents of this book, World in Process, is light. Interestingly, this one verse claims that God is light. Theologically speaking, God is postulated to be an absolute, which one can deduce that science also acknowledges this fact, although it doesn't use the word God to describe light. It uses it in terms of speed. And in that sense, it's absolute, because the speed of light is the same always, no matter where you go in the universe. 186,000 miles per second, to be exact. And a quote from 1 John, verse 5. This then is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. And if you recall, in the opening chapters of Genesis, God separates the light from the darkness. Duly noted. And in the opening chapters as the Gospel of John echoes Genesis, in the beginning was the Word, or Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Based on the concept that God is light, we can actually replace the terms him. All things were made by light, and without light was not anything made that was made. And here we go, verse 4. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Notice, the light shined in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. And in the preceding verse that I quoted from 1 John, God is light, and in him is no darkness. Yet that light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So, based on a reading of those brief passages, we can draw some rather fascinating conclusions about the nature of God and his relationship, if you will, with science, or the nature of light, if you will. So, a quote from the book World in Process, and we're entering into the realm of process philosophy once again, as it is as Alfred Whitehead was masterful at making these conclusions in his philosophy. There's not much that he left out. From page 42, I quote, "Science as process. The discovery of relativity illustrates how science itself is a process. First, there is a hypothesis that is invoked to try to explain observations of nature. A good hypothesis is then further elaborated into a theory that not only explains the given observations, but is also able to predict the results of new observations. Finally, if a theory has been verified for a sufficient time, its premises or postulates are sometimes given the status of a law of nature. By laws of physics, we generally mean the equations that describe the behavior of physical systems, ranging from the nucleus of the atom to our everyday world, and to the behavior of stars and galaxies. Newton's law of gravity and his laws of motion are examples. Relativity is still recent and has the tentative status of a theory, but eventually may become the law of relativity. For science to proceed, the theory must be testable. If it is a good theory, it will also have within it enough basic understanding to make predictions for experiments not yet performed. A superb theory, such as the theory of relativity, posited by Albert Einstein, not only does all of this, but also gives us a new view of the world and invites us to expand our thinking. The discovery of gravitational radiation is a recent example of the interaction of theory with accurate observation that lies at the heart of science. Science is also a process in the sense that even the so-called laws themselves are only contingent and sometimes need to be modified. As our understanding of the universe increases, and increase it will, science is continually evolving. And I would add with that, as well as philosophy and theology are evolving as well, but not always in the same direction. Although in many ways they are. The concept of a unified theory is one way that they are operating in the same direction. The laws of Newton are very useful, and we do not have to discard them altogether, but we now know that there is a limit to their applicability. The theories of relativity are more general, and Newton's laws become a special case, applicable when velocities are much less than the velocity of light, and when the density of mass energy is minimal. Thus, the old laws of the 19th century physics about space and time, as well as matter and energy, are included in, but superseded by, the new idea of relativity. Science is an ongoing process in continuous evolution. One may well ask a theological question: why do these laws exist? Not just now or here on Earth, but at least 10 billion years ago, and at 10 billion light years distance. Such order is the basis for the evolution of complexity and novelty in the universe, a concept that is basic to process philosophy and theology. For the latter, the order in the universe is the result of the divine primordial nature. As ideas are introduced throughout, it may be helpful to have a sense of the chronological order. Descartes' substantialism was introduced in the latter part of the 17th century, as was Newton's law of gravitation. And the latter's idea that light consisted of particles. In 1800, Thomas Young's double-slit experiment, to be discussed later, proved that light had a wave aspect. From 1850 forward, modern physics and cosmology has had an accelerated development. Alfred North Whitehead's book, Process and Reality, which formed the basis for his process philosophy, was originally published in 1929. Only events that are discussed in the present are shown. Words such as electron and muon denote the time when these particles were discovered. Process thought and relativity. As we have seen, time is of the essence of process thought. As the universe goes forward from event to event, due to special and general theories of relativity, we must consider time differently and non-intuitively. In our familiar Newtonian world, time is absolute. It is the same everywhere, whether a clock is in motion or not, or whether the clock is in a gravitational field or not. This is in accord with our experience in a world where speeds are very slight compared to the speed of light, and where gravity is relatively weak. But the world looks different when velocities of objects such as clocks are comparable to the speed of light, and when gravity is immense, as near a black hole. The special theory of relativity tells us that mass and energy are two forms of the same reality, mass energy, and predicts that they are in principle interchangeable. Many physical processes demonstrate this, such as the production of pairs of particles from electromagnetic energy and the destruction of electrons and positrons to provide mass energy in a new form, annihilation, radiation. Thus, matter itself can be considered as part of a process. It is a fact of nature that the velocity of light is the same in all systems, whether moving or not, or whether under the influence of gravity or not. Einstein's genius was to recognize this and to use it as a cornerstone of both the special and general theories of relativity. The consequences of this assumption change our ideas not only of time, but space as well. We now understand that space and time, previously thought to be separate, are interconnected. In the new view, space and time are transcended by a unified concept, space-time, which mixes the two together in different ways that depend on the velocity of the observer. The time of an observer at rest depends only on the time seen on a moving clock, but also depends on where the clock is located in the moving system. A moving object is contracted in the direction of motion. Events that are simultaneous for an observer at rest are no longer simultaneous to the one who is moving. In his general theory of relativity, Einstein recognized the fact that not only is the velocity of light the same for a system at rest and for one that is accelerated, but also that the latter is indistinguishable from a system that is at rest and acted upon by gravity. The theory shows us that the presence of mass energy slows down time. It also explains gravity as a consequence of the curving of space-time caused by mass energy. The curvature of space-time itself produces further curvature, or in addition to the gravitational field. Mass energy tells space-time how to curve, and space-time tells mass energy how to move. In the 19th century, matter, motion, time, and space were all considered separate realities. So the idea that separation is illusion or illusory is valid. Now, in accord with process thought, they are all related and interdependent. Mass energy, time and space we observe depend on motion, and space and time change in the presence of mass energy. Thus, there is an interdependence of time, space, mass energy, motion, and gravity. They are all interlinked as part of a process. And I would add here, with the concept of a unified theory in view, I could say science, theology, philosophy, and spirituality are all interlinked as part of a process. The general theory also predicts that accelerating masses, such as stars rotating in an orbit, will give off gravitational radiation, a prediction recently verified with great precision. The observed expansion of the universe, which is predicted by the general theory of relativity, shows us that the universe is indeed not static, but dynamic in its entirety in accord with process philosophy. And I would add here, with process theology in mind, God is not static, but dynamic in his entirety in accord with process philosophy. The special and general theories of relativity gives us a connection between concepts that we previously thought to be separate. Such interrelatedness is in accord with process thought. For example, the philosopher of religion and physicist Ian Barber, discussing the metaphysical implications of the theory of relativity, says that it shows us a dynamic and interconnected universe. Space and time are inseparable. Mass is a form of energy, and gravity and acceleration are indistinguishable. There is an interplay between the dynamics of matter and the form of space, a dialectic between temporal process and spatial geometry. Matter is, if you will, a wrinkle in the elastic matrix of space-time. In this regard, it could be said that a particle which concentrates mass energy in a special location is just a singularity in the space-time metric. We shall consider particles at various times throughout, but it is useful to remember this alternative viewpoint. Process thought makes one suspicious of the word particle, which connoted a changeless, inactive substance in the 19th century. That said, I would mention here that so does classical theism. A changeless, inactive substance is its God. This idea is not in accord with the modern view of matter, as we shall see. In process philosophy, Whitehead also has a principle of relativity that is compatible with Einsteinian relativity. Whitehead's principle is that each event in the universe influences subsequent events. In process thought, each event is the result of its choice among alternatives that its history partially determines. Partially determines. What we choose as a reference system for the speed of an object also depends on our previous history, that we are here and not somewhere else. A different observer would have a different history and might well determine the speed to be different. All observers are equally correct, and they are interconnected through the relationships of the special theory of relativity. Whitehead was fully informed about the revolutionary nature of Einstein's theories of relativity and notes it in Process and Reality. The general theory of relativity is essential to our understanding of the evolution of the universe because it predicts its observed expression. This expansion is fundamental to the current Big Bang theory of its origin. Expansion provides a universe that is dynamic and creative, producing amazing novelty. Immense creativity has occurred in this universe since the Big Bang, which initially was just a fireball consisting only of intense radiation. As we study the way the world is, from subatomic particles to the cosmos, we shall find it very compatible with the idea of primacy of events rather than substance, a basic tenet of process thought. The way in which the universe is constructed, events lead to evolution at every level, even for black holes. Thus, the general theory is key to our understanding of the cosmos and is fundamental to the foundation of a new myth connecting science and religions. In the last few decades, astrophysicists have increasingly employed it not only to understand the expansion of the universe, but also to explain the observation of black holes, quasars, orbital precession, and gravitational radiation. The development of both the special and general theories of relativity demonstrates that science itself is a process. Even such revered ideas as Newton's laws are subject to modification. Science is contingent and ever evolving, and I would add theology, religions, and philosophy is as well. No ideas are fixed for all time. It is sometimes erroneously stated that the special theory of relativity shows that everything is relative, that there are no absolutes. But the velocity of light is absolute. It is the same in all frames of reference, even accelerated ones. The laws of physics also are absolute in this sense. They are independent of reference frames. The theory of relativity, although radically changing our concepts of time, space, energy, matter, and gravity, has a deterministic form in that its predictions are only limited by the available initial and boundary conditions. It also assumes the classical idea that there can be an observer who objectively measures a system without affecting it. And most experiments in quantum mechanics obliterates that concept. Both of these assumptions turn out to be untrue in the physical world. Quantum mechanics and complex systems tells us that the world really is non-deterministic and that the observer is linked to the system observed. Philosophically, I would say this is a plus for those in the free will camp. In physical systems, there is a fundamental uncertainty that makes deterministic predictions either impossible or limited in precision. End of paragraph. And with that, I shall end this discussion. An epic dialogue. Of course, this discussion based on the premises that everything's evolving and interconnected, and everything is a process. This epic dialogue must continue as things evolve and grow. So shall the conversation between religions, spirituality, science, philosophy, and theology. And I thank you for listening. And I encourage you to do your own research within these academic categories and see just how closely they are interrelated, although many like to keep them compartmentalized. To stay so would be to not unify or to form a grand unified theory of some sort. So the conversation must continue. As the human race searches for its purpose and ultimate ultimacy in the universe we find ourselves in. So keep asking what, who, how, why. It's important. From birth, we begin by asking questions, and these questions should never stop. Otherwise, perhaps we would stop existing as a species. But I don't think that's our destiny. With evolution in mind, I would refer to Teilhard's idea of cosmic evolution and towards a cosmic omega point of union with God that he called an omega point. So I think that has a place at the topic of the conversation as well. So not necessarily when we're speaking on evolution to include theology is important. Because if we're looking at the entirety of reality, we cannot exclude the idea of design or a designer or a creator. I think that is nihilistic. And with that philosophy, what would end up happening? Annihilation, which is where the term nihil comes from, nothing. But we always want there to be something. And the something includes us, a self-reflective, consciously aware species. God consciousness is in our DNA. I believe it's for an ongoing purpose. That said, I thank you for listening.